Welcome to our Going Green podcast. Today we're going to have a look at the topic of really about re-educating people. And we're going to look at how over the years things have changed. People's attitudes have changed and what we may need to do to change people's attitudes to all sorts of things of global warming and recycling and the like. The trouble is, if it's done too much, then people say, oh, we live in a nanny state. You're not allowed to do this and you're not allowed to do that and you can't do anything. And what really governments want is they want people to take the initiative themselves and to do their own thing to look after the planet.
The answer is, although technically correct, the answer
I was giving you the official line, yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's one of the things where it depends on what government you're a part of. If you're a more liberal one, then the answer is no. The government doesn't want people to do it on their own. The government wants to not force change, but the government wants to intervene and help and do things. Whereas
Lead the change, I think.
the change is the answer. Whereas a more conservative, doesn't want to do anything because they don't care. If the market says otherwise, or
but you're using words like liberal and conservative, very UK terms, but you could actually do that in American terms, which would be,
well, the American terms would be Democrat, Republican.
but which is which?
Well, Republicans are always conservative, and the liberals are always the Dems are always,
Yeah, okay.
It's which but anyway, it's the type of person you identify as, more which way you lean in the political spectrum.
Are you a liberal person in that you are following you're allowed to do what you like, which we could of course call conservative here? People are allowed to make their own choices. Or are you in a more authoritarian regime where you're told what to think?
Yeah, but at the same time, that answer is a different thing, because of course it's whether people want to, if people want the government to intervene, or does the government want to intervene? Things like setting up, not taxes, but taxing, say, the highest amount of CO2 emitters for their carbon tax, essentially. That is not a conservative viewpoint. That's a more liberal government point.
Okay, so we're talking about then re-educating people. I'll give you a story that I really relate to, and that's my local Catholic priest when I grew up. And he would always say, and he's been dead for now many years, so I'm just going to quote him here in his absence. And he would say, give me a child at 8, and at 12, I'll give you a Catholic for life. And he wasn't talking about being nasty or anything else. He was talking about how you brought children up and how you educated them and what you got them to do and think. And that could affect the way they thought for the rest of their lives. So a lot of this climate change now actually falls on the teachers of young children who are trying to instill in them thoughts on the environment,
the values and things.
You see little kids as they go out and they say, oh, Mummy, put that in that bag. We don't buy a bag. We do this. And those sort of things have a strong influence on people, not now, but for the rest of their lives. And I can make one other little comment before you try and get in.
But yeah.
Yeah, you're desperately trying to get in. And I'll go on then.
Well, all I was going to mention was it's one of those things where, there's lots of surveys. There've been lots of surveys about the changing attitudes, and it's been done. The same question's been repeated over and again, so we can track over the years. And genuinely, I wouldn't say the younger people. The younger people are more active in regards to demanding and wanting change and standing up for the environment, those sorts of things. But of course, that stems from people trying to, influence them, as you're saying. But it's actually looking through the data. You can see sort of the age groups, and you can sort of see that although young people this year are yelling the same things, the same age group at in 2009, so now they've moved up a age band, if that age group, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. Their opinions have actually got more, I wouldn't say narrowed, but they're less inclined to, I wouldn't say care, that's the wrong way to put it.
And you're being terribly generalistic in
Oh
this.
yes, but it's sort of their attitude to sort of, not their belief, but if of you doing something to help change or stop climate change has decreased, and yeah, so
But generally, when children are young, they do what their parents and their teachers tell them. As they get a little bit older, they start to rebel and they want to do their own thing. And then as people generally get a bit older, it appears that people become more sort of, I want to use the word conservative, but I don't mean as in party following, but sort of trying to sort of conservative in their ways. They become sort of more focused, and in fact they change a little bit in their attitudes, that they care a little bit more for the environment. They start to think, what am I leaving for my children and my grandchildren?
yeah, it's this group of sort of, early on you haven't got much on anything, so you don't really care about sort of changing. It's like you don't have a car, therefore you're not really involved in the talk about petrol pollution or CO2 emissions. But as soon as you get a car, you're then saying, you know, I'm worried about these petrol emissions, but of course I need a car to go to work. So you're suddenly sort of, as you get older, as you go up the age bands, suddenly you get more things like, I need to focus on, I need a car. So please, government, don't ban my car. As opposed to early on when you didn't have one, you weren't really here nor there whether cars were being banned. It's not the fact that the attitude has changed. It's more the fact that your, well, I wouldn't say lifestyle, but it's more the
But it
fact that,
is like people's lifestyle do change. When you initially sort of start coming out into the world and having a car, there's you. Then you probably find a partner and you're going around, and there's the two of you. And then you have a family, and then, well, that's when you need a big car, or sort of a minibus, or a sort of pantechnicon, uh,
oh,
that big word, wasn't that? To try and move all that clobber around that seem to come with children. And then later the children leave and they start on their systems, and then a lot of older people then think about downsizing.
yeah, well,
And so as life goes on, people's attitudes do change. But we're talking here about other things, about what we can do to change them. And I remember watching TV when I was growing up, and this is in the 1960s and 1970s.
oh yeah,
And I've showed you a few videos of TV programs in that time and things that I thought were great. And we look at them now and we think, oh, they weren't so great.
well, it's
Attitudes have changed.
yeah, I agree. It's silly things like, what was the attitude to smoking, 40 years ago versus now?
Yeah.
And the answer is it has changed. Now, yes, it has changed for three reasons, and that is, firstly, there are no advertisements of smoking slash tobacco and those sorts of things. Secondly, it's a heavily regulated industry in regards to what they can and can't do. And then the other critical thing is, I say new technologies coming, but vaping came through, which was essentially a way to get that nicotine. I say high, but I can't say, but it was not really, without any of the dirty, bad stuff of the cigarette. So suddenly, people moved on to the vaping, onto the new, I won't say trend, but the
Yeah, it
better
is. New
version.
trend. Yeah.
and suddenly cigarettes aren't seen as any good because, of course, people know that they got all this dirty stuff in. They're you know, we're shown, but
They've been educated.
they've been educated in what's in them, and so um, one of the major reasons people say that vaping is actually a cleaner form of smoking, which it is, not great.
In some respects, yes.
Yeah, we'll get onto all the bad stuff about it, but it is the sort of the idea that and so suddenly cigarette companies are massively struggling. You might see a few of them actually go sort of bankrupt in the next 20 years because of this. And this, yes, it was a little bit of government investing and a little bit of government changing, educating people and sort of doing these programs to let people know and those sorts of things. And it's taken 40 years, but has public health got better in the last 40 years? And the answer is yes. So, it wasn't mostly, you think critically, really. The government, what, I can't remember, like 5, even 7 years ago, introduced a plastic bag. I wouldn't say tax, but it was more sort of
Yeah, you
a
had
cost.
to pay. You had to pay for your
They-
plastic carrier bags, didn't you?
And so, and that has critically made a vast reduction of the amount of plastic bags used, which
Yeah,
is a
yeah. Because I would have quite in those days. I'd have gone out, bought something, and you always got a plastic bag to take it home. You took it home, and you threw it away, and it was standard. Whereas now I carry a recyclable bag around with me. It's in fact a cotton bag, so it will recycle well, and I've used it now for the last few years. And we just carry them around. The only problem is when Paul and I go shopping, we have one of these bags and we have this small bag and we need to try and put a lot of stuff in it.
Yeah, well, that's our problem. But it's the idea that they put this tax as a way to force people to not use plastic bags,
And it's worked.
and it's worked. So it's whether you admit that, say, intervention from from a government or governments actually changes attitudes. But now you don't even think about you always carry a bag with you because the shops it's going to cost you that extra, what, 5p, 10p, who knows, rather than actually saying, I'm just going to go out and use one instead, it's the idea that small interventions can actually make a large change as opposed to, big swathing like banning petrol cars in the year 2030. It's not quite right. It works better doing it the small little changes rather than the big ones.
But things do change, like the pandemic. I didn't wear a mask before the pandemic. I don't know many people who did. I now always have a mask with me. And if I'm walking outside, I'm fine. But if I want to go into a shop, I don't legally have to wear a mask. But I'm used to putting one on, and I do put one on because, well, I still have yet to get COVID. And I'm quite pleased that I haven't got COVID and had it. And well, I'd like to keep it that way. Thank you very much. It's one of those things I don't want. So I carry around a mask and I wear it anytime I feel threatened. When I'm in a more confined space. So if I'm going to go on a train, which I haven't been on, if I'm going to go in a shop, which I have been in a few, then things change. But my attitudes to going out have changed slightly because in the last 2 years, not many of us have been out that much. And now things have changed. Some people go, right, we can go out, we can do lots of things. And others are just say, well, I've got used to sort of not going out so much. I'm probably not going to carry on going out as much. I don't need to.
Well, yeah, it's one of those things where that attitudes, big major things happen that causes attitudes to swing. And that's not bad. That's not, it just happens. And we do know attitudes do change towards things. So,
But that's things like the pandemic that changed, and that people were seeing on their screens of every TV. They could get this message home, and our government did actually stand up, and they did actually manage to frighten people, which wasn't a bad thing. I think people need to be worried and frightened about things. that was good. But where does most of this re-education take place? We've talked. We've got schools, and it is the role of teachers to try and give the right ideas to shape young minds, to make them aware of the local situations and what they need to do. So I think teachers take an important role here, especially those in sort of primary care. Uh, I've been a secondary teacher for much of my life, and by that time, many of the students have already formed very strong opinions on things. Although there are lots of times when I've talked to students and said this, and they said, "Oh, I've never thought about that." And sometimes we stop and we discuss this, that, and the other. And I know I've had feedback from parents when they say, yes, and so's talked to me a lot about this, and you've got them really sort of, not necessarily the word is excited, but interested in this subject. And generally, we're talking about the planet and what we're going to try and do to sort of keep it, because this is Earth 1 and there isn't an Earth 2.
Yeah, the classical advert is sort of no, there is no planet B.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is the idea that things do stem from conversations and things. If it's like, let's say, if the government doesn't listen to its people, nothing happens. So, but going to all these public meetings and sort of asking what would you want the government to do, and then it's not sort of saying I want the government to reduce the. Why don't we ask them? How about you thought about doing this wind power, or why are we not doing this or that, and sort of getting people to investigate reasons and looking at things and admittedly writing lovely reports saying why they can't do things, but it's a sort of saying, why can't we do it? Well, it's bad, it's got all these impacts. It's like sort of, all the mining in Cornwall. People have got big things about mining in Cornwall affecting all the rock structure.
Well, it's things like fracking, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
going to actually damage the rocks. And you've got people talking to the government and protesting. And it does appear, in this country at least, that the government does listen. And they can hear that there are a lot of people complaining about this, that, and the other. It doesn't mean fracking, it can be all sorts of things. And they do try to listen to the people, unless the people are desperately wrong about one thing or another. So, we were listening to people saying, put up a no-fly zone over Ukraine because, we've got the Ukraine crisis on the moment. And you have someone saying, well, don't do that because of such and such. And then people say, oh, yes, that's a good reason.
Yeah, it's this not intervention, but it is this sort of listening. And well, this is what's happening. Unfortunately, in America is basically not that they didn't listen, but they only listened to one argument or one side of
Yeah.
and that's basically feeding in their own interest. Which is the whole thing. Whereas taking both sides, the pros and the cons, and actually discussing, as what they would term as a bipartisan. But it is this idea that you need to include everybody in the conversation, not to say that you haven't included everybody, is because lots of people or different people bring different, I wouldn't say ideas but
There's different views.
different views and different opinions. It's like people go, I don't want fracking in my backyard, or I don't want anything in my backyard. And the answer is they're being selfish because although they want it, they don't want it there. But the answer is, well, where else are we going to put, it's nice and windy here. Could we not put a wind turbine? I said, no, I don't like the sound of it or don't like the look of it. Well, why? What's the problem? What's your problem with I don't like the look of it? Well, how would you like us to make it look? Would you like paint it green or yeah? And it's those sorts of things. And people go, well, I don't know. I just don't want it. I don't. And it's the
But then they also want renewable energy.
Yeah.
and you say to them, well, now your electricity is expensive. Well, I don't want expensive electricity. Well, you could have that renewable. Oh, well, yeah, maybe I would like renewable, just not here. And people are changing in their attitudes. They are saying, yeah, all right, well, maybe this isn't quite so bad. I've got solar panels on my roof, and some people have said, "Oh no, I wouldn't like a house with solar panels on it. Oh no, that's
Makes it look
not,
ugly or something.
yeah." And it's not absolutely pretty. I think if we could get better sort of solar panel tiles, I couldn't afford solar panel tiles. I've just afforded sort of large solar panels on my roof, and attitudes gradually over time do change. We get people saying, do you make any money on those panels?" So people's attitudes do change, and they say, so you're cutting half the cost of your electricity.
Yeah, and the idea is, I suppose I could live with them if it's doing me a benefit. I suppose I could live with. But it's like, do solar panels really deduct value from a house? And the honest answer is, from the looking at surveys and people done that, is it doesn't really. They really don't. The only ones that really do, which is absolutely bizarrely, are, I'm not saying the more first ones, that's the wrong way to put it, but where basically they put them on all sorts of, well, not random locations, but they literally spattered them everywhere, sort of trying to gather as much. This is things like putting them on the sheds and putting them on your lawn and those sort of things. It's a bit too much, but you know, but just on the roof.
Yeah.
Do you really look at your roofs that often? And the answer is you don't, apart from when it's windy.
I get many people come here because I do private tuition, and when they come here, I talk to some of the students about solar panels, and they say, "Have you got any then?" And they've just walked past the house and they haven't noticed. And it is a case that they don't tend to notice things because it's commonplace. You see quite a lot of houses with solar panels, so well, it's not something new, it's not something different, it's not something radical. It's becoming more normal and accepted, and therefore they don't sort of think about it so much. This is where some of this re-education has worked.
Well, it's also the fact that they're seeing lots of houses with it, and it is becoming the norm to see solar panels on the roofs, as opposed to when they were first introduced. It was sort of, spots, or look at there on there, the feeding tariff, or look at that sort of. But because it's, it's they people have adopted it. People are just saying, taking it on board and saying, oh look, someone's got solar panels, or all those people, they've got loads of solar panels. It's now not the, oh look at that person, they've got solar panels attitude. It's more sort of, well, it's more commonplace. But that's because loads of people have adopted it, and so everybody's sort of seeing it and sort of like, well, it's a commonplace. It's in that general attitude of sort of, it's there, we don't mind it being there. So
And we're going to start to see now over the next few years more people going to not just solar panels, but going to change their heating system. Uh, I noticed that there's quite a few houses with boilers in their loft. Now, I've got a gas boiler in my loft. I know I've got one there. I've seen what my installation looks like. That's a little chimney. As I go past other houses and walk by, I go, oh, they've got one. Oh, yeah, they've got one. And so we'll start to see then these air heaters, and they'll be stuck on the walls or outside the house. And people will start to say, oh, they've got one. Oh, they've got one. Oh, maybe I ought to get one.
or more importantly is, oh, maybe I could get one, or maybe it's accessible, as in, oh, if they've got one and their house is the same cost as mine, roughly, then they're doing all right, and I'm doing all right. Well, maybe I could get one. It's the sort of, not the luxury choice, but seeing it seems the similar people, not the super uber rich or the uber poor, but it is seeing everyday people sort of go, well, if they can afford it, perhaps I could. Or, but it's also that people do is they they shame people as sort of saying, "Why aren't you not doing this? Why aren't you doing that?" Or, you could be doing more. Well, I barely afforded this house. I can't be expected to do, you know,
But we do look at trends in fashion, and you do get your fashion leaders, and they wear this, so I start wearing this. They do that, so I start doing that. And if we get a lot of those type of people who are our influencers,
the original influence, not the modern version.
yeah, then basically they can start to sort of show that they're doing this, and then people start to think, well, should I do that? I remember when a few governments ago, I was Mr. Average. I was what they called Mondeo Man. I still actually have, a Ford Mondeo. And that was the sort of average person. And you went through, oh yeah, I'm fairly average. I do this, this, and this. And I'm now not, because I'm still a Mondeo man, because I've still kept my car. It's 20, nearly 30 years old now.
Yeah. Well, they can't. Who knows what the next average man is? But it is they're saying that idea that if you actually make it not average, that's the wrong way to put it. But if you do sort of say the everyday person, you make things a bit for the everyday person to actually achieve and get. Likely is more people are going to adopt it. They say usually the middle, what they say, the middle class is huge, and the bottom and top, lower class and upper class. But I know we're getting rid of the class, but I'm saying if you aim majority to make changes in the middle, then the two ends generally try to go and change towards the middle.
Yeah. So if you've got an enormous amount of money, then people say, well, do you actually care about the environment? You could afford not to care. You could afford to have this car that does
Yeah.
so many gallons
Yeah,
per mile.
Yeah, critically, the fuel costs, yes.
Yes. And they're not worried about the fuel costs, except a lot of them now do seem to start to sort of worry about those things. And if you're the super poor, then you're still wishing you could have a car.
Yeah. So, this is where I wouldn't say things are changing, but you need to not target, but it's things where helping the right people to do and change is one of those things where, you know, technically governments do ask, how can we support you? Because you obviously they are there to support the people who are living in their countries, and they do ask what more support can we give, what more support do you want, and there's a whole range of measures they can implement and sort of, but it's going to have the not political will, but the people have got to want it, and sort of, not just say one individual like, I want a tax break because then I'm be able to afford this statue, or it doesn't quite work like that. Whereas we were like a public park here, how could we buy the land, and sort of, so they also work on sort of changing the land titles to allow that land to be in the public interest or domain, to allow things to change.
There are more like-minded people now on the issues of renewable energy, on looking after the planet. It has become, with things like in this country, COP26, been much more advertised as being something that's going on, being really important. We are starting to see on television daily programs about the climate, keeping people thinking about it and what can you do. So that is part, I think, of re-educating people. It's not just educating people, it's re-educating people. Well, this has been our Going Green podcast, looking at re-educating people. Well, I hope you've enjoyed listening, and we'll be back next week with another topic. So until then, it's now goodbye from me, and
And a goodbye from me.
goodbye.
Bye.